Hello and welcome. Today we are going to be taking a look at some new items from ELDRIDGE. So I purchased the Betty palette and you can see it's got some beautiful purples in here. I also picked up the new concealer pen and this is just going to be first impressions. And of course I had to get the new Kitten Lash in Burnt Umber, the brown shade. So let's go ahead. Let's start off with the eyeshadow palette. All right, so this is the palette Betty, and we've got these creamy velvety textures for the eyeshadow palette here. You can see that this first shade here is going to be kind of like a burnt golden brown. So we definitely have some golden hues in here. There's a touch of like orange, and it's just going to be one of those warm golds. Our second shade here I think is actually super interesting. This is almost like a rosy taupe. So you've got a little bit of that taupe base in there, but it's mixed mostly with a dusty rose. So that's really what you see more of. And then we do have some shimmer in here, and there's actually silver and golden shimmer. The third shade here is going to be a soft lavender, which actually is brighter than you might think at first. So you can see it goes on very lightly, but you can build this one up. So you can get a little bit more color from this one, or you can sheer this one out. The next shade is going to be a deeper purple shade. And you can see this is more of a classic purple with a touch of a dusty hue to it. So this purple, I would say this is going to be more like a lilac with a little bit of soft pink, whereas this one here is going to have a little bit more of that deeper eggplant hue in it. Now, the most special shade of the palette is this one here. And a finger swatch doesn't do this justice. You're going to have to see this one in the eye swatches. But you can see this is pretty sheer. And if you use a fluffy brush, you're really just going to see this glitter overlay on here, which is more of like a pink and golden glitter. But we have a little bit of a soft, kind of like a gray blue shade in there as well. And then our last shade here is really beautiful brown with some taupe in it, but it's really just going to be more of a cooler brown. And this is the Betty palette. So let's move on to the eye swatches and demos. The Betty palette has 5.1 grams of product. It's made in Italy with a 2-year shelf life. Now, back in the fall, ELDRIDGE discontinued a lot of her older shades, from the eyeshadow palettes, the lipsticks, and a whole variety of different items. And so this is now the purple palette. Myth, the previous palette with purples in it, was one of the discontinued ones. So we will be comparing that. I've got a lot of comparisons that we're going to take a look at the end here. And this palette here, I have to say, is absolutely gorgeous. So the formulas overall have kind of that velvety gel cream texture to it. And I really like it. It's a little bit creamier than, when Guerlain redid their eyeshadow palettes and they came out with that kind of velvety, grippy formula that they don't really seem to be using anymore. It's like that, but a creamier version. And so I find it to be a really nice formula to use, particularly when the palette's new. As the palettes get older, they do dry out a little bit and they still work totally fine for me. However, I do sometimes need to change my application to pick up product a different way. And what I mean by that is perhaps some of the shades might not be as pigmented with a brush as they are with a fingertip as the palette gets a little bit older. But I haven't had any issues other than that. Now, when you're using this palette, and it's fresh, it's new, we've got that nice creamy formula. The only thing I want to know is there's really no fallout with these shades, unless you're using like a fluffy brush. Like for example, when I go in with the crease brush, I'm not really getting fallout on my face. There's no issues with that, but you are going to kick up some like powder dust in the pan, which can transfer to some of the shades. So just need to be cautious not to get any of your deeper shades mixed into like the lighter shades there. So just a little thing to know. And again, that's really only with the fluffy brushes, and it's because of the texture. This palette is described as a unique, fresh edit of cool, silvery mink, lavender, and pinky lilac with touches of warm peach blush. I think that's fairly accurate, although instead of the warm peach blush, I'd go more with more of a golden pumpkin versus peach. But you know, it's a really beautiful palette. We have a couple warmer tone shades in here, such as the first two shades in the palette. They both lean warm. However, they are absolutely stunning. And I think it's nice mixing up some warm shades in with the cooler tones as well. And the second shade, although it leans warm, it's still actually going to be closer to neutral, whereas the first shade is totally on the warm end of the spectrum. As we're going through the other shades, the third shade, that soft lavender, that lilac shade, that is going to be a cool tone lilac, whereas the deeper purple, the first one in the bottom row, is going to be a little bit warmer of a purple. It's still a cool tone shade, but it is going to be a warmer hued purple compared to the lilac. And then our duochrome here, you can see, is super special. We have kind of this soft, kind of like a sea gray blue. And you don't see too much of that pigment, but when you put this on as a topper, you get this really beautiful duochrome effect. You definitely see pink and golden glitter mixed on here. And again, if you're using a fluffy brush, you're really gonna just see the glitter, but you can kind of cool things off a little bit with this sea gray blue kind of shade. And then our brown, mink brown shade is going to lean cool, but it's definitely going to be a beautiful cooler tone brown. Now, those are my color descriptions for the shades. Lisa Eldridge does have her own color descriptions on her website if you'd like to check those out. And this palette has been designed around the colors of her cat or kitten, Betty. So Betty has some unique coloring, and that's kind of how this palette was designed. And, you know, if you haven't watched many of her videos or anything, you might not have known that, but if you are familiar with her work, she features Betty quite frequently. So I think this is a really beautiful palette, and it really does her cat justice. I think it was a really nice, it's a nicely designed palette. I love the colors here. And I do just want to make a quick note that the website has a palette listed at 5.4 grams. However, my palette on the back of it does say 5.1 grams. So just something to note there. Just like other Lisa Eldridge palettes, this is refillable. You can purchase shades individually, mix and match. Now, I do want to note that this palette is a limited edition. However, the individual shades from this palette are available for purchase. So if you're only interested in a few of these shades, you can definitely, look at purchasing them individually. And they're about $14 US each. However, since the palette and the shades in general are limited edition, I definitely wouldn't wait too long on these if this is something you're interested in. The full palette itself retails for $62 US. So you are getting a little bit of savings purchasing the full palette versus purchasing the shades individually. Plus you also get the packaging here. So I think this is an absolutely beautiful eyeshadow palette. I'm really happy with the colors. The formulas are great. Let's go ahead and just take a quick look at the mascara and the Pinpoint Concealer before we move on to comparisons. So let's just take a quick look at the Kitten Lash mascara. And I have to say, I really love this mascara, the Kitten Lash formula in general. It's one that I've been using for several months in the black. This one here is the new Burnt Umber shade, and you can see that it's brown, but it's really more of a mahogany brown. So we do have some red in there. And then this one's actually almost done here, but this is the original in the black. So this is our mascara, and as you can see, we have kind of the curved wand. Now in the eye demo, you'll see that I do my right eye with the convex portion of the brush. And then on my left eye, I use the concave and then the convex portion, which will give you a little bit more volume, make your eyes a little bit more dramatic. If you're looking for something a little more subtle, just using the convex side on its own gives you more separation. So just a few product details as we're looking at the mascara. We have a 6-month shelf life, which is standard for mascaras. And we have 8 milliliters of product. It's made in Italy. The outer packaging and the wand is The outer packaging and the wand are identical to the original Kitten Lash. And again, we now have this beautiful burnt umber shade. It is going to be a reddish brown, so it's going to lean warm. I would have loved to see a cooler tone brown to pair with this palette, but I do love this color as well. So I think it's a really pretty shade. All right, and let's take a quick look at the Pinpoint Concealer. So I actually have swatches of this in the up close demo, so we'll just do a quick swatch here, but you do have a twist up, and when you pull this off, you do have a sharpener here. So this is shade number 1, which was the shade, I chose this based off of their shade selector, based off of the shade of the skin tint I wear, which is shade T1. So let's go ahead and take a look at this up close. Now I have to say, I don't have a ton of spots that I really want it to cover. You know, I have more like general redness and things I'd like to cover. So I'd love to see this formula in a larger applicator. This is going to be an expensive product if you're using it all over your face, but for a pinpoint concealer, which is its intended purpose, this is actually really nice. So anytime you have a blemish, putting this on, and I like to tap it out with my finger, or I have like an old, it's actually a paintbrush that I purchased probably over 20 years ago. And I use those for concealer, but today I just used my fingertip to kind of pat it in and melt it into the skin a little bit. And I think it's pretty seamless. I'm really happy with this Pinpoint concealer so far. And again, this is a first impression, so I'll feature this again later, at least in my update video at the end of the month. Now, as for some product details, we have 0.4 grams of product here, and we have a 1-year shelf life, and it's made in Korea. There are 16 shades for this concealer pen, and there's 16 shades for this pencil, and it retails for $34 US. So I have to say though, I think the formula is really nice. I'd love to see this in a slightly larger concealer stick form for like under the eyes or for larger swatches, even maybe as a foundation stick. But so far I'm really liking this. I'd love to try it all over my face, but I feel like that's just going to use a little bit too much product. Might try it sometime. Let me know if you're interested in seeing it that way in a video. But overall, first impressions of the concealer are really great. Now let's go ahead and move on to some comparisons for the eyeshadows. And we've got a lot to get through here. So I'm going to start off with the Lisa Eldridge palettes that I already own. And we're going to take a look at these. This one here is Vega. And I'm going to put this one vertically here so you can kind of get an idea. This is a great neutral palette. We've got some cooler neutrals in here. And you can see this is a really beautiful soft kind of taupe shade there. And this is probably my favorite of the Lisa Eldridge palettes. And we have a black as well. So that's Vega. I think it's a really beautiful neutral palette. And as I mentioned, as the palettes get a little bit older, some of them, you know, the textures dry a little bit. So now instead of being more like a velvety cream, mine's more putty-like, which is totally fine. It works totally fine. But, you know, it does dry out just a little bit. So just something to note. Now, this one here is Myth, which has been discontinued. So I'm going to go ahead and put this one kind of, we'll do some of the shades down here. This is really more of a dark purple, but you can see this one here has gotten dried out. Honestly, the formula in this palette wasn't that great. This one I did have issues with after time passed, but you can see we have kind of a soft pink duochrome in place of the blue one there. This shade here, the third shade, is a really beautiful kind of soft mauvey, almost like a mauvey gray with a little bit of taupe. This one here is still nice and velvety. And you can see it's going to be kind of like a deeper plum. And then we have a burgundy, which looks a little red. And then more of a purpley burgundy. So that was Myth. And so in the pan, some of the shades look like they might be similar, but in reality, they aren't at all. Now, I also wanted to take a look at Sorcery, which, you know, although Vega's probably my favorite palette overall, my favorite shades are actually in this palette. So let's go ahead and take a look at these. And we have kind of a dark green. Again, mine's drying up a little bit, so it's harder to swatch. Then we have more of a green metallic, followed by more of a chartreuse olive. And this shade here is my favorite. I mean, that is a beautiful duochrome. We've got some blue, some purple, some green, kind of all mixed in there. And you can see how it compares. Let's go ahead and put this side by side with the one in Betty. Betty is more of a subdued, more blue-gray. It doesn't have as much of a color shift. Then we have kind of this soft greenish gray and a blue. So that's Sorcery, which again, absolutely stunning palette. And then the last one I have is Fawn. And, you know, most of these shades here don't look like they're going to go with it all, but I figured let's just go ahead and swatch them just so you can see how different the color stories are in case this is one that you have. So this is going to be more browns. It's a warmer palette. We do have kind of this pinky golden shade here, which let's try to swatch that again. And then we've got some nice warmer tone browns in general. So it's a pretty palette. It is going to lean warm, whereas Betty's definitely going to lean cool. Vega's kind of your cool neutrals. Fawn's more of your warm neutrals. So we have Betty. This is Vega, Myth, Sorcery, and Fawn. All right, so I'm going to take these off and we're going to move on to some palettes from some other brands. All right, so I did what I could, but some of the shades did stain a little bit. So we're going to start off with this palette. This is the new SUQQU 146 that's coming out on March 20th. And let's go ahead, we'll put this one vertically here. You can see this is a gorgeous purple palette as well. But I would say overall, the SUQQU does lean a little bit cooler. And we have a more like rosy shades with it versus more taupe shades. So these are kind of like some rosy taupes kind of mixed in there. This is more of like a muted dusty rose. This one has a touch of taupe in it. Then we have a really soft pale lilac. You can see this is going to be a lot lighter and perhaps a little bit more blue based than this shade here in Betty, which is called Lavender Queen. And then our deeper shade in the SUQQU is going to be a little bit more blue base. Again, a little bit lighter. It doesn't have more of that. It doesn't really have any of that pink overlay that you kind of see in the Betty palette, which is called Prima Donna. Next, I want to take a look at the Chanel Utopia palette, which is not really going to match with this, but I figure it's worth taking a look at, particularly for this duochrome shade. But you can see that the duochrome here is going to be more like pink. You've got a little bit of brown, a little bit of orange, a little bit of purple, but it's completely different from the shade in Betty. This is Cle de Peau in number 12, Purple Ocean Twilight. One of my favorites. And this is going to be similar to the SUQQU palette we just looked at. So you'll see that the colors here are more similar to the SUQQU in 146 than they are to Betty. However, if you like a similar color story to Betty, but you don't want all of those shimmers and metallic shades, this is a great option because we've got mattes, we've got some satin shades, but these are all going to be very subtle. They're not nearly as shimmery as the Lisa Eldridge. The SUQQU has a little bit of shimmer, but the Cle de Peau really doesn't have shimmer in it. So, you know, it kind of depends what you're going for, but they are all similar color stories for the purples. And then this is the NARS Afterglow Tempting palette. So I thought we could take a look at some of the shades here. So this is the second shade in the palette. A little bit too golden here. We have kind of this soft, kind of like a lilac shade here. It's kind of in between the two for the Betty palette. This is the middle shade, which is a duochrome. You can see, again, our colors here are very different from those in the Betty palette. It's more similar to that of the Chanel Utopia palette, but much more pigmented. We have kind of a reddish brown, which is similar to this. However, the Betty shade, this is going to be more rosy. Let me put this one side by side so you can see how that compares. And you can see the NARS is going to be a little bit rustier. Let's just go ahead and take a look at this one here. No, that doesn't match at all. And then this one on the bottom. These are our last two shades in the palette. So you can see that those aren't going to go with the Betty palette at all. And we are running out of room, but let's take a look at the Chantecaille trio. So this is the Nymph Eye trio. And I'm just going to go ahead and plug these right over here. So this is Nymph. You can see that our purple shade is going to be much more blue based, more of a dusty lavender instead of more of these brighter lilacs. This shade here is kind of similar to, it's lighter, but it's similar to the first shade in the Betty palette. And just for completion's sake, this is the Diana trio. And these shades aren't really going to match, but I do kind of want to see, this is the green, how that compares to the duochrome in Betty. You can see it's green instead of kind of that gray blue. And then we have kind of that soft pink and this golden beige, which doesn't match up. All right, so just a quick review. We've got Lisa Eldridge Betty here. This is Chantecaille Nymph, Chantecaille Diana. This is going to be our SUQQU in 146. This is Chanel Utopia, Cle de Peau number 12, Purple Ocean Twilight. And this is NARS Afterglow, or Tempting Afterglow. So I hope that was helpful. And just a quick summary of the items here today. So I have to say all the items today were a win. The Betty palette is a beautiful color story. You know, if you're looking for some more like rich metallic shades, that's what we're getting from here. We've got some beautiful, cool shades. Honestly, I think the actual best shade is going to be this duochrome in here. You could just add that on top of anything. It cools it off a little bit, gives it something a little unique. I think it's a really beautiful shade. So overall, the palette is a win. As for the mascara, I love the Kitten Lash formula. So I think this is a great mascara. I haven't had any issues with it. Even my black one, which honestly, I've got to toss it very soon. I have, I think, another month left on it. No issues with it flaking or, you know, changing texture or anything as it's gotten older. The Burnt Umber shade, I'm so glad she brought out a brown. I do wish it was a bit of a cooler brown compared to this one. This is definitely more of a reddish brown, which I do like, but I tend to wear the more reddish browns more in the fall. So that's my thoughts on that. And then the Pinpoint Concealer pencil. I really like this. I think this is great. It's a first impression so far, so I will definitely let you know in another video how this has held up over time and, you know, what my thoughts are after repeated use. But so far, first impressions are great. So let me know your thoughts. Let me know if you've tried any of these or you ordered them. And again, I think one of the great things about the palette is if you're interested in just a couple of the shades, you can purchase individual shadows and place them either in an empty palette or they are magnetic. So thank you so much for tuning in. I hope this has been helpful and I will see you very soon. I hope you have a wonderful day.